Was it wrong to want a man who made me feel alive, even if my husband was sitting 3 chairs away? Did I deserve the silence that followed my toast, or the family that stopped answering my calls? That birthday speech cost me my marriage, my home, and every friend who once raised a glass beside me. My name is Thessaly Morrowgage, but everyone calls me Thessa, and I am 31 years old, a dental hygienist at a mid-sized clinic where I clean teeth and make small talk for a living while wearing scrubs that smell like mint and latex by the end of every shift. I have always seen myself as someone who deserves more than what the ordinary world offers. Someone with a spark that most people spend their whole lives searching for and never find, and I carry that belief the way other women carry their wedding rings, always visible, always polished, always on display. I married Corbin Gage 3 years ago because he was stable, because he had a good job as an IT project manager at a logistics company, and because my mother said stability was the one thing a smart woman should never turn down. But stability, I learned quickly, is just another word for predictable, and predictable is a slow kind of death that happens while you are still breathing and smiling and pretending to be happy at family dinners where nobody asks the real questions. It was a Friday evening when this story really begins, and I was standing on the rooftop patio of the Lantern Deck, a bar overlooking the river where string lights swayed above small round tables and a photo booth sat in the corner behind a velvet curtain. The railing had chipped green paint that flaked off under my fingernails when I leaned against it, leaving small pale marks on the metal where the rust showed through, and the distant horn of a ferry crossing the dark water below sounded once, low and long, like something ancient waking from a dreamless sleep. I was holding a gin and tonic in one hand and my phone in the other, and Corbin was not there because I had told him I was at a work event, even though the clinic had posted a story on social media at 5:09 p.m. saying they were closed for the weekend. This was my third Friday at the Lantern Deck this month, and each time I came with someone who was not my husband, and each time I told myself this was self-care, this was independence. This was what a woman with a spark does when her home life offers nothing but reheated pasta and questions she does not want to answer. His name was Renzo Salazar, 29, a freelance event photographer with dark curly hair and a way of looking at you that made you forget every responsible decision you ever made. I met him 2 months ago when he photographed a retirement party at my clinic, and our connection was immediate and electric in a way that Corbin never produced. Not once in 3 years of shared grocery lists and scheduled date nights that felt more like appointments than adventures. Renzo came back from the parking lot with his camera bag slung over one shoulder and a grin that pulled me toward him like gravity, and he suggested we take one more photo booth strip before the night ended. Inside the velvet curtain, the flash popped 4 times, and in the second frame his hand rested on my lower back with a warmth I had almost forgotten existed. I tucked the Polaroid strip into my wallet afterward, 4 tiny frames of evidence that I treated like a souvenir from a life I believed I deserved. There was something else I had not told Corbin, or anyone except Renzo. I had missed my period 3 weeks ago and taken a test last Tuesday in the clinic bathroom during my lunch break, and it was positive. 10 weeks pregnant. When I told Renzo over a text message that same evening, he responded with a thumbs up emoji and then went silent for 48 hours. But I told myself that creative men process big news differently, that his silence was not indifference but depth. And I believed this because the alternative was too ugly to examine. I got home past midnight smelling like rooftop air, lime, and a cologne that was not Corbin's. The bedroom was dark, but Corbin was awake, sitting on the edge of the bed with his phone face down on the nightstand and his hands resting on his knees. He asked me softly where the work event had been held and who organised it, because he had seen the clinic's social media post saying they closed at 5. He mentioned the exact time, 5:09 p.m., because he had been eating dinner alone when the post appeared on his feed. and he said none of the staff accounts had posted anything about a Friday gathering. He asked which colleague had invited me, because he had looked through the clinic's staff page and found nothing, and he said he was not angry, but wanted to understand why the story did not match what he could see. I laughed and told him he sounded like a detective on a bad television show, and I said the event was at a partner practice at a different location that the clinic page would not mention. I did not name it. I told him that if he spent less time checking social media timestamps and more time being interesting, I would not need to go out so much. And I rolled over and pulled the blanket up to my chin, and I considered the conversation closed. The next morning, Corbin was already dressed and drinking coffee in the living room instead of bringing me a cup the way he usually did. His laptop was open on the coffee table, and when I walked past, he tilted the screen slightly away from me, not aggressively, just enough that I could not read what was on it. A calendar notification popped up on his screen before he dismissed it. Riverside office, 10 a.m. That afternoon, he found green paint flakes on my jacket sleeve hanging in the hall closet, the same shade as the rooftop railing, and he held a tiny chip between his fingers and examined it with the kind of patience I found infuriating. He asked if the partner practice had an outdoor area because these paint chips looked like they came from an old metal railing, not a conference room. He asked me the name of the practice and what floor the event was on, saying he would like to verify it so he could stop worrying and they could move on. He offered to drop the subject entirely if I just told him the name and address, saying he would not call or check. He just wanted to hear the truth once. I told him that in a healthy marriage, trust means you do not interrogate your wife over paint on a jacket, and I said my mother never asked my father where he went, and they stayed married for 35 years. And I walked to the bathroom and shut the door. Corbin folded the paint chip into the small piece of paper from the nightstand drawer and placed both in his wallet. That night, before turning off the lamp, he slid his phone under his pillow instead of leaving it on the nightstand, and he went to bed at 9:30 without another word, and the distance between us in that bed felt wider than the river I had watched from the rooftop. I texted my sister Sienna that my husband was being dramatic again, and she sent a laughing emoji and told me to ignore him, and I placed my hand on my belly in the dark bedroom and told myself that this baby would know what real passion looked like. Somewhere in the apartment, Corbin's laptop screen glowed with a single open tab I could not read from the hallway, and his phone was face down and silent in a way that felt different from all the other nights of our marriage. Monday morning at the dental clinic break room, I sat across from my best friend, Layla Voss, under fluorescent lights while the microwave timer beeped behind us and the faint antiseptic smell that clings to scrubs filled the small space between the plastic chairs and the laminate counter. Layla was 30, loud, supportive, and incapable of asking uncomfortable questions, which was exactly the kind of friendship I needed at that point in my life. I told her about Corbin's interrogations, the paint chip, the social media timestamp, the Friday night cross-examination about the work event, and she agreed immediately that he was controlling and insecure. We laughed together over our lunch containers, and I felt validated in the way that only happens when someone mirrors your version of reality back to you without pausing to check whether your version is actually real. But at the next table, a quiet dental assistant named Bridget was eating yogurt and scrolling her phone, and she paused at the door when she left, her spoon still in the cup, glancing back at me with an expression that sat somewhere between curiosity and pity, as if she already knew something I did not want anyone to know. I had mentioned Renzo by name twice that week in the break room without thinking about volume or audience, and Bridget heard both times, absorbing the name the way she absorbed everything, silently and completely. I did not care because Bridget was the boring one who never contributed to conversations, and I certainly did not know that Bridget was married to a man named Owen, who had been Corbin's college classmate and occasional softball teammate. Tuesday evening, Corbin stopped at the Joint Bank ATM vestibule on his way home and printed a mini statement under the fluorescent strip light, standing on the scuffed tile floor in his work jacket with his briefcase between his feet. One charge stood out from the columns of groceries and gas stations. $187 at the Heron Suites, a boutique hotel downtown, processed at 11:42 p.m. on the Thursday. I told him I was at a team dinner with colleagues. He did not call me about it. He folded the statement into his jacket's inner pocket and came home, cooked chicken and rice, and set the table without mentioning the charge or anything else that might have been burning behind his calm expression. Before we ate, his phone showed a dismissed calendar reminder that read Cedar Street 3 p.m. for the following day, and afterward, he moved his wallet and car keys from the shared key bowl near the front door to his bedside drawer without explanation. He also asked me, casually while clearing plates, for the login to our online electricity account, and I gave it without suspecting anything, because what kind of man weaponizes a utility password? He wrote it on a sticky note and placed it inside a binder on his desk, labelled Auto, though the binder looked noticeably thicker than any car manual should be, and I remember thinking briefly that his sudden interest in organisation was either a personality change or a midlife crisis arriving 2 decades early. Wednesday afternoon at the supermarket parking lot, loading a bag of avocados and sparkling water into my trunk, I ran into my sister Sienna, who was putting groceries into her own car 2 spots over. She mentioned casually that she had seen me at a wine bar called Ember on Tuesday evening around 6:15, waving through the window as she drove past, and I had not waved back. The same Tuesday I told Corbin I was at a training seminar that ran until 8. I lied smoothly, the way you lie when lying has become a kind of muscle memory, and said the seminar ended early, and I stopped for one glass with a colleague. Sienna nodded, but her smile shifted slightly at the corners, and I dismissed the shift because Sienna was 4 years younger and had always trusted me without question. I did not know that Sienna would mention this encounter to our father Dean over the phone that evening, and that Dean would call Corbin the next morning under the pretext of getting a plumbing estimate for the house, and pause at the end of the call to say I seemed distracted lately and ask whether everything was okay at home. Wednesday night, Corbin sat on the edge of the bed holding the ATM mini-statement, the ink slightly smeared across the hotel name so the H in Heron looked like a smudged gate under the glow of the bedside lamp. He told me the exact amount, $187, the exact date, and asked what happened at the Heron Suites on Thursday night, because a team dinner at a restaurant would not produce a hotel charge processed close to midnight. He asked what time I arrived and what time I left, because the 11:42 p.m. timestamp suggested I was there long after any professional dinner would reasonably end. He said he was not accusing me of anything, but if I could not explain a midnight hotel charge on our shared account, he would need to open a separate account for his own salary to protect their finances, because trust and money cannot live in the same house if one of them is a stranger. I told him men always turn money into control, and I said the charge was for a spa treatment at the hotel because the Heron Suites had a spa open to non-guests that I visited after dinner. I grabbed my phone and texted Layla. He is checking bank statements now, classic. Then Corbin mentioned Sienna's sighting at Ember on Tuesday. He asked who the colleague was that I stopped with for a glass of wine, and he pointed out that my car was already parked at Ember at 6:15 when the seminar was supposed to run until 8, which meant either the seminar did not exist or I left 2 hours before it ended. Through the open bedroom window, a truck brake hissed on the street below, a long exhale of compressed air that filled the pause between his words and mine. He told me that 2 separate lies in 1 week, the hotel and the seminar, made him feel he was sharing a home with someone who treated honesty as optional, and he said he could not plan a future alongside someone who edited the present to fit whatever audience she was facing. He suggested they talk to a counsellor together, not because the marriage was broken, but because he wanted to understand my perspective in a space where no one was attacked for asking simple questions. I told him that Layla said checking bank statements and tracking sightings was textbook controlling behaviour, and that every woman I knew would be horrified if their husband brought receipts to bed like evidence, and I said the conversation was over and turned off my lamp. Through the wall, I heard the faint tapping of keyboard keys that continued well past midnight, a sound that was becoming as familiar as the refrigerator hum. His side of the closet now had a small gap where 3 dress shirts used to hang, moved somewhere I had not yet discovered. The next morning, Thursday, his phone screen lit up briefly on the coffee table with a text from an unsaved number. A single blue circle emoji, and the words Tuesday confirmed. He picked up the phone, read it, deleted the preview without changing his expression, and said nothing. I assumed it was a coworker message about a project deadline, because assuming was easier than asking, and asking might mean hearing an answer I was not ready for. On the kitchen counter, a red-circled date appeared on the wall calendar, next Thursday's square, circled in ballpoint ink with no label attached, and I walked past it without stopping. Saturday evening, 6:30 p.m., and the community centre birthday hall was decorated in silver and black balloons for Darnell's 40th birthday. Corbin's co-worker from the logistics company, who I had met exactly twice before and could barely remember the second time. A DJ booth played mid-2000s R&B from the corner. Long tables were covered in paper plates and aluminum trays of catered jerk chicken and rice and coleslaw. And a microphone stand waited near the cake table like a stage prop looking for its performer. I wore a fitted emerald dress that I bought on the personal card I had claimed was at home during the hotel incident, and the fabric pulled slightly across my midsection in a way I chose to call flattering rather than revealing, and I attributed the glow on my skin to happiness, not the 12 weeks of pregnancy I was carrying beneath the surface of every conversation. Renzo was there near the back wall, adjusting his camera lens with the focused calm of a man who was being paid to document other people's joy. Darnell's wife had hired him to photograph the event, and I had suggested Renzo for the job 2 weeks earlier through a mutual contact, though I called it a coincidence in my own narration because coincidence sounds better than orchestration. Corbin pulled out my chair and brought me a sparkling water without being asked, and I told myself he was performing the good husband act for his colleagues, because every kind thing he did had to be reframed as performance in order for my choices to remain justified. Across the table, Aunt Prue, Corbin's aunt and Mabel's older sister, sat in a navy blouse with reading glasses perched on her nose, watching the room with the quiet precision of a woman who had spent 32 years as a school administrator cataloguing what people said versus what they meant. Mabel arrived late carrying a gift bag and sat beside her sister, and they exchanged a whispered comment about my dress that I caught only the tail end of. 3 glasses of Prosecco in, and I told myself 1 or 2 glasses would not hurt the baby, though this was the 3rd. I was louder and warmer than usual, leaning into conversations, touching people's arms, calling everyone sweetheart as if we were all old friends at a reunion nobody organised. Renzo circled the room with his camera and passed my chair, brushing his hand against my shoulder for less than a second. A gesture so brief it could have been accidental if it had not been so deliberate. Aunt Prue saw it clearly from across the table. Corbin missed it because he was refilling a water pitcher at the beverage station, and I remember being relieved by his absence in that moment, which should have told me something about the architecture of the evening I was building. Then the toasts began. 3 co-workers gave short, warm speeches about Darnell, and the applause was genuine and easy. I stood up without planning to, pulled by the Prosecco and the spotlight the way a moth is pulled by a bulb it does not understand, and I walked to the microphone. Corbin looked up from his seat, confused, because he did not know I was going to speak. I started with charm, saying I was grateful to be here among such amazing people, that Darnell was lucky to have a wife who threw this kind of party. Then I turned toward Corbin. I said the toast was also for my husband, the man who tried so hard at everything, cooking, cleaning, being supportive. I paused. The room leaned in. I said there was one thing he could never seem to manage, no matter how hard he tried. And with a half smile and a lifted glass, I said he would never make me pregnant. The silence was sudden and absolute. The DJ's track ended between songs, and 40 people stared at me with expressions that ranged from confusion to horror, and the bass that had been vibrating through the paper plates stopped as if even the speakers were holding their breath. I continued, apparently unable to stop, saying some women just need a different kind of energy, that biology is honest even when people are not. I patted my stomach lightly and said the timing was finally right. Then I caught myself, saw the room seeing me, and tried to recover by lifting my glass and saying, I just meant I was excited about the future. Happy birthday to Darnell. Cheers. I sat down to thin, uncomfortable applause. Mabel placed both hands flat on the table and breathed slowly. Layla laughed once, a sharp, nervous bark, then covered her mouth. Renzo lowered his camera and walked toward the exit. Corbin had not moved, and his water glass was still raised halfway, suspended in the air between his hand and his mouth. 20 minutes later, on the smoking patio, a cracked concrete slab with a rusty bench and a single overhead bulb attracting moths whose shadows twitched across the ground, Corbin found me texting Renzo and asked why I needed a microphone and an audience to say something about their private life. He said the DJ had to restart the music to break a silence that lasted 11 seconds, and that his mother and his aunt and his co-workers heard every word. He asked what I meant when I patted my stomach, and said the timing was finally right, because to everyone in that room it sounded like a pregnancy announcement delivered as an insult. He said if I was pregnant and the baby was his, he needed to know tonight, and if the baby was not his, he needed to know that too, because I did not get to announce something like that through a public toast before telling him in private. I rolled my eyes and said it was a joke, that everyone laughed, even though the room had been silent, and I told him he was ruining a perfectly fun evening with his endless paranoia. He followed me to the hallway near the restrooms and said Renzo had brushed my shoulder at the table and that Darnell's wife mentioned I was the one who recommended the photographer. He asked how I knew Renzo personally, because a photographer hired 2 months ago for a clinic event should not be touching me at a party where my husband was present. The bathroom door beside us opened and the hand dryer roared for 5 seconds, swallowing his last sentence, so he had to repeat it quieter and steadier once the noise stopped. I told him I was done being interrogated at a birthday party and said if he mentioned the photographer one more time, I would tell everyone in that room he was jealous of a hired camera operator. And I walked back into the hall. Later, Corbin sat in his car in the parking lot with the engine off, dashboard clock reading 10:41, typing into his phone's notes app, dates, names, locations, amounts, while Renzo loaded his camera equipment into a silver hatchback 2 rows away without looking at him. Inside the hall, Aunt Prue excused herself to the restroom and wrote 3 sentences on the back of a birthday program with a pen from her purse, folded it carefully, tucked it into her navy blouse pocket, and returned to the table. She patted Mabel's hand once and said she would remember every word that was spoken tonight. Tuesday, Mabel left a voicemail on my phone saying she had heard every word of the toast and would be visiting Sunday for a family conversation, and that patience has a structure, and that structure has walls. I deleted the voicemail and told myself Mabel was dramatic, just like her son. Sunday noon at my parents' house, the dining room with floral wallpaper and a heavy oak table and hydrangea bushes visible through the window where light fell in pale squares across the tablecloth. I arrived with a story I had rehearsed in the car. I told my father Dean and my mostly silent mother, who sat peeling an orange at the counter with the concentration of someone who preferred fruit to conflict, that Corbin had been acting strange for weeks. I said he checked my bank statements, interrogated me about work events, accused me of lying about a seminar, and stormed out of a birthday party like a child because I made a light-hearted joke during a toast. Dean asked what the toast actually said. I gave a clean, sanitized version, saying I joked that Corbin was too careful and I was the spontaneous one, and I left out the pregnancy reference, the stomach pat, the exact words about him never making me pregnant, and every detail that might have made my father look at me differently. Sienna sat at the far end of the table with a glass of water and asked what the exact words were because people at the party had been texting about it and the versions she was hearing did not match mine. And this was where I shifted strategy, because the mocking and the rage shutdowns that worked on Corbin were not working on my own family. Instead of fighting, I became soft. My voice dropped to something close to a whisper, and I said I was exhausted, that Corbin's coldness was affecting my health, that I had not slept in 3 nights because he moved to the guest room without warning. I pressed my hand to my forehead and said all I wanted was for my family to support me during the hardest time of my marriage. Dean reached across the table and patted my hand, and Sienna set down her water glass and looked toward the window, and the room tilted in my favor. I believed this performed vulnerability was my most effective weapon, better than anger, better than mockery, because it turned sympathy into a shield. But it failed quietly and completely, because that evening Sienna texted Corbin directly and asked for his version of the toast. He sent her 3 calm, factual sentences that included the pregnancy reference, the exact words, and the photographer's presence. Sienna read his message twice, and when I sent her a text that night saying, "Love you, sis," with a heart emoji, she did not reply. Dean's hand lingered on mine at the table earlier that day, then withdrew, not in rejection, but in the way someone pulls back from a surface they suspect might be hotter than it looks. Monday afternoon at a playground near my parents' neighborhood, on a wooden bench with a brass memorial plaque reading for Margaret, who loved autumn, Aunt Prue sat beside Corbin and handed him a sealed envelope. Inside was the birthday program with her 3 handwritten sentences from Saturday night, describing the exact words of the toast at 9:15 p.m., the stomach pat, and the photographer's shoulder touch. She told him that in 32 years of school administration, she learned one reliable truth. When someone lies in public, the people who remain silent become part of the lie, and she would not be part of mine. She added that she saw me text someone urgently right after the toast, before I went to the smoking patio, typing fast with a smile on my face, and that a woman who just made a silly joke does not text with that kind of focus afterward. A child on the swings pumped higher and higher, and the chain creaked with a rhythm like a metronome, steady and unhurried, and indifferent to everything happening on the bench below. Monday evening, Corbin came home, and this is where the silent decision happened that I would only understand much later. He walked to the garage without speaking to me and opened the trunk of my car. He removed the infant car seat base, the one we had installed together 6 months ago for the baby we were supposed to have someday, and he carried it across the concrete floor to his own car and locked it in his trunk. He did not explain or announce this transfer. When I later noticed the base was gone from my car, I assumed it fell out, or he moved it to make space, and I did not bother to ask. The base still had a small stuffed giraffe clipped to the handle, a gift from Mabel with the price tag still attached, waiting for a child that would share her son's name. Tuesday, Corbin called me from a glass-walled conference room at his office. He asked why I told my family a different version of the toast than what actually happened, noting that Sienna texted him Monday night asking for his version, which meant my account at the dinner did not match what others were hearing from party guests. He asked me to tell him, right now, the exact words I said during the toast, word for word, because if my version matched what Aunt Prue and 3 co-workers remembered, he would accept he misheard and drop the subject forever. Through the conference room glass, a co-worker walked past carrying a birthday cupcake with a single candle, and the flame wobbled in the air conditioning current. I told him I did not need to recite my own words back to a man who recorded conversations in his head like a human security camera, and I called Aunt Prue a bitter old woman who had been searching for a reason to dislike me since the wedding. He then shifted to the bigger picture and counted the incidents out loud: the Heron Sweets charge on Thursday, the Ember Wine Bar on Tuesday, the rooftop I denied on Friday, and the toast on Saturday, 4 separate data points in 10 days. He asked how I would feel if he disappeared 4 times in 10 days and then made a speech in front of my co-workers saying I would never satisfy him. He said starting tonight he would use the guest room, not as punishment, but because he needed space to evaluate what kind of future he wanted and whether it included a marriage built on stories that changed depending on who was listening. I told him I did not negotiate with men who used guest rooms as strategy, and I hung up. That evening, a cloud sync notification appeared on his laptop. File uploaded successfully. A new binder appeared on his desk beside the auto binder, this one labelled Bank, slim but organised with coloured tabs visible along the edges. And his phone showed a calendar entry for Thursday. Pine Hill, 1:30 p.m. Thursday evening on Layla's apartment balcony, 4th floor, overlooking a street where a fried chicken shop's extractor fan pushed warm, greasy air upward in waves that mixed with the cooling night. I sat in a plastic chair with a glass of white wine and recorded a voice note for Layla while she changed clothes inside. I spoke for 3 minutes and 40 seconds, and I said everything I had been keeping sealed behind my confident smile for weeks. I said Corbin had become impossible, that he moved to the guest room and changed his email password, and was building some kind of file system like a man planning a war he had no chance of winning. I said the baby was growing and the baby was not his, and he would never figure that out because men like Corbin cannot imagine a world where they are not the centre of every story. I laughed in the recording and said Renzo was not father material either, but at least he made me feel something other than bored. And I said when the baby was born, I would tell Corbin it was his because he was desperate enough to be a father that he would believe anything. And I called this my insurance policy. I pressed send. The voice note went to Layla's chat, but her phone was connected to a Bluetooth speaker in the living room, and when she picked up the device to pause the music, her thumb slipped across the screen and she accidentally forwarded the voice note to a 6-person group chat called Clinic Girls that included Bridget. Layla deleted the message from her end within seconds, panic visible on her face when she ran to the balcony to tell me, but 3 recipients had already received and played it. And Bridget listened to it twice with her hand over her mouth before saving the audio file to her phone. I did not fully understand the scale of what had just happened, and I breathed in the warm, fried chicken air from below and told Layla it would blow over because nobody in that group chat mattered enough to cause real damage. Friday morning at the pharmacy, standing in the queue under fluorescent panels while barcode scanners beeped around me and a toddler wailed 2 aisles over. I bought prenatal vitamins from the shelf for the first time instead of ordering them discreetly online. A mutual friend named Carmen, who attended the same gym as Corbin, stood 2 spots behind me in line and saw the vitamin box in my hand and smiled and asked who the lucky father was. I hesitated for half a second, a pause Carmen registered with a slight tilt of her head, then said Corbin, "Of course, who else?" Carmen congratulated me warmly and said she would tell him next time she saw him at the gym, and I called her from the parking lot 5 minutes later and asked her not to mention it because we wanted to announce it properly. Carmen agreed, but her voice shifted, and she said she thought Corbin had mentioned they were taking a break from trying. The prenatal vitamin box had a small dent in one corner where someone on the shelf before me had pressed it with a thumb, and the price sticker was peeling at the edge, and I remember staring at that dent for a long time after hanging up the call. Friday evening, Corbin came home at 6:30 and cooked pasta and set the table for 2 and asked me about my day with the polite interest of someone conducting an interview rather than sharing a life. After dinner, he washed the dishes, dried his hands on the towel, and said one sentence that landed in the kitchen like a stone dropped into still water. He said he would handle things properly from here on. He did not explain what things meant or what properly looked like, and he folded the dish towel, hung it on the oven handle with careful precision, and walked to the guest room. His wedding ring was absent from his finger, and when I asked about it Saturday morning, he said his finger was swollen, though his finger looked entirely normal. On his desk, a phone alarm flashed the label drop-off forms before he silenced it with one tap. His 3 binders, auto, bank, and a new one labelled home, sat on the shelf with their coloured tabs aligned, and a contact on his phone had been renamed to a single blue circle emoji. Saturday morning, Corbin sat in the living room armchair by the window with a cup of black coffee and his hands resting on his knees. No phone in sight, no binder open, no distractions. He asked me to sit down. He said he had spent 3 weeks trying to have a conversation with me, and lifted his left hand and counted 4 refusals on his fingers, one for each time I shut him down. He asked me to give him 1 hour, 60 minutes with no phones and no walking away, and to answer 3 connected questions: whether I was pregnant, whether the baby was his, and whether I had been seeing someone else. He asked why I patted my stomach at the toast and said the timing was finally right if it was truly a joke, because Aunt Prue witnessed me texting someone immediately afterward with a smile on my face and documented the moment at 9:25 p.m. on the back of a birthday program. Outside the window, a garbage truck reversed on the street with a high-pitched beeping alarm, 3 pulses, then silence. He said if I answered honestly, they could figure out a path forward together, whether that meant counselling, separation, or co-parenting, and if I lied again, this would be the last personal conversation they would ever have, and everything after would be handled through logistics and structure. I tried my softest approach. I uncrossed my arms and lowered my voice and said I understood why he was upset, and I took responsibility for the toast being in poor taste. I offered to apologise to Mabel and Aunt Prue if he agreed to stop the investigation and return to the bedroom, but only when I was ready and only if he promised never to mention the toast, the hotel, or the photographer again. He listened, nodded once, and then asked one follow-up. Was I pregnant? Yes or no? I said no, and I blamed the stomach pat on Prosecco bloating, and I watched his face as the word left my mouth. He stood, picked up his phone, and walked toward the guest room. At the hallway entrance, he stopped and said he had asked the simplest question a husband can ask, and I chose to lie while looking directly at his face, and that was all the answer he needed. He closed the guest room door with a controlled pull until the latch caught with a soft metallic sound. And then I crossed the line that could not be uncrossed. I drove to Layla's apartment and sat on her couch and composed a long message to the Morrow family group chat. All 17 members, my parents, Sienna, 2 aunts, a cousin. I wrote that Corbin had been emotionally abusive, that he checked my bank statements and interrogated my schedule and built files on me like I was a suspect. I announced the pregnancy for the first time to my entire family and said his reaction had been cold and suspicious instead of joyful. I did not mention Renzo, the hotel, or the voice note. Layla read the message over my shoulder and said I was brave. But Sienna, who had already heard Corbin's version and read the voice note transcript that Bridget's husband had forwarded, screenshotted the family message and did not reply. Dean read it at his plumbing supply store and sat alone for 20 minutes before calling Mabel to hear her side. By midnight, only 4 of 17 recipients had responded, all with non-committal messages, and I told myself the silence of the other 13 meant agreement. Sunday morning, the apartment was empty. Corbin's car was gone. The guest room bed was made with military corners. His binders, laptop, and backup shirts had vanished from the closet, and the wall calendar showed today's date marked with a single vertical pencil line, like a tally or a checkpoint. At 10 a.m., a calendar reminder I did not create appeared on my phone through our shared account. Dr. Oka 4, Prenatal Clinic, Monday 9 a.m. Bring ID. I stared at the screen for a long time because I had never shared my doctor's name, the clinic address, or the appointment time with Corbin. And yet here it was on my calendar, placed there by a man who had spent weeks learning how to find what I thought I had hidden. I Googled the clinic name with shaking fingers, and the first result described it as a certified facility for court-ordered paternity testing, and the screen protector on my phone creaked against its edges because I was gripping it so tightly. I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet and my phone in my lap, the empty counter gleaming above me where Corbin's coffee mug used to sit every morning. I called him. 4 rings, then voicemail. I called again. Same result. I texted, "Where are you? What is this? Call me now." No reply arrived. Not in 5 minutes, not in 10, not in the hour I spent on that floor with my hand on my belly, 15 weeks pregnant now. And for the first time, the baby did not feel like insurance or leverage or proof that I was desired. It felt like evidence that would speak louder than any story I could construct, and the apartment was so quiet I could hear the wall calendar page shifting slightly in the draft from the window I had forgotten to close. I sat in the prenatal clinic waiting room scrolling my phone when a process server called my name and handed me an envelope. Inside, a court-ordered DNA test, divorce papers, and an evidence summary listing everything. The deleted photo Corbin had already downloaded, Aunt Prue's statement, the voice note Bridget saved, hotel receipts, my biased text to family, rideshare records to Renzo's place. I called my sisters. Layla had blocked me. Sienna had heard the voice note and hung up. Dean said he loved me but couldn't defend what he didn't understand. The nurse called me back. Corbin had already given his sample earlier that week. His absence was the loudest thing in the room. I'd believed confidence was armor, that the right story could overwrite any fact, that Corbin's silence meant he had nothing left. But his silence was architecture, built from timestamps and witness statements, and by the time I understood, I was already holding the envelope. The DNA confirmed what I knew. The divorce went through. Corbin asked for nothing punitive, just dissolution and the apartment back per the prenup I'd forgotten we signed. I moved into a studio above a laundromat with my things in garbage bags. Renzo went private on Instagram, moved away, responded to news of the baby with one word: congrats. The clinic girls' chat disbanded. Sienna visited monthly but never stayed long. Dean drove me from the courthouse, carried one bag upstairs, said he'd call tomorrow. He did. We talked 4 minutes about weather and groceries, the most honest conversation in months because neither of us pretended anything was fine.